pest of the week this week is fungal.
Fungal problems, yep.
Fungal disease in tomatoes. And our hope here is that we can just give you some basic tools. So oftentimes here we get people that'll send us a picture or an email or bring a plant in, and what's the question? What's wrong? Well, if you have some tools and maybe you can kind of look at something and go, that looks fungal. And they said, do this for fungal. So, you know, just some basic shortcuts, basically, so you don't have to know all that's in that book.
Some ideas, and that's not to say that we won't have all three in our tomato plant at that point,
right.
But, you know, all three problems. But, you know, if we know we've had these four we're going to talk about fungal problems, then one of the major ways to help that, you know, we can put down a chemical. Whether it's an organic fungicide or a conventional fungicide, that's going to help kind of act as a sunscreen, kind of help protect that leaf, you know, as we get splashing from the soil coming up to the leaves. Right. If we've got a fungicide on there, think of that as a sunscreen that helps protect that. Right. So, you know, we're going to be applying that to most any of these fungal diseases that we have.
Right. So it's probably a good place to start before we get into individuals is talk about the disease triangle, because that's key on pretty much any disease on any plant, and it's not that hard to understand.
Yeah, it is. And if you see on the screen that we have up, you know, on a disease triangle, you have three legs on a triangle.
Right.
You have a host in this,
which is your plant.
Is the plant a susceptible host to be specific? So that susceptible host is susceptible to that disease. So we have a susceptible host. You have a virulent pathogen, so a pathogen that's out there ready to attack that host, and then you have the proper environment. So you have the three things, and what our goal is as gardeners is to break one of those chains or cut out one of those three things, whether it's the host, whether it's the pathogen, or whether it's the environment. That will cause less disease.
Right.
If we have all three of those, then we are going to have the disease. Right. So with that in mind, you know, that's an easy explanation that, you know, we go in and we select a tomato plant that is resistant to Fusarium.
Right.
So we're cutting out that susceptible host because it's not susceptible to that particular strain. So we'll have less disease. So or watering our tomatoes. If we're watering from the top and we're getting moisture on the leaf, it's holding that moisture in, creating a longer time period during that day to make that proper environment. Right. And if we cut that out, if we dry it out, we get hot, we get dry, we're going to have less proper environment, therefore less disease. Right. So that's kind of an idea. And then on the pathogen side, if we put a fungicide down, that sunscreen that I was talking about, that's going to help keep that pathogen from getting into that plant. Right. So we're going to have less virulent pathogen that's able to get into that plant because of that sunscreen or that fungicide we put down. Right. Then we're going to have less disease. So that's a 10-minute talk on a disease triangle. But if we think about it and we kind of relate to that, we can make some decisions to help us out to have less disease.
Well, you mentioned environment. I mean, kind of controlling and manipulating the environment on these fungal diseases is key. You mentioned the water and the moisture, but a lot of these diseases, the fungal diseases, are soil borne,
yeah.
So if you have an overhead sprinkling system, or even the rain, as that comes down and hits the soil, it splashes that fungus up onto the plant, and then it can spread. So if you can interrupt that environmental factor, for example, don't use overhead sprinkling, use a drip system or hand water or something.
Right.
And especially mulch.
Mulch.
Put the mulch down. That's going to create a barrier between the soil and the air, etc. So when it rains or it hits it, it's not going to splash back up on your plant.
Yeah, mulch is a great thing, and you know I love using pretty quick composting mulch, like wheat straw, barley straw. There's quite a few different clean straws. You don't want to put grass or just some hay out there because it's got some weed seeds in it. It could have some weed seeds in it. So be careful about that. But yeah, the idea of once the water rolls off the leaf and it bounces, or you get a direct drop that hits the soil and bounces, it's going to get on that. And just little things like that, believe it or not, will help you later on in the end.
Right. And another environmental factor you can be in charge of, manipulate, is crop rotation. Because these can build up over
Yeah.
a period of time. If you
Yeah.
if you plant a tomato that, say you had Fusarium wilt or the
Mm-hmm.
other one of these factors on there, and it just kind of got started a little bit, well, then you put tomatoes in the next year, it's going to get a little stronger,
more.
and then the next year it's going to grow the
Mm-hmm.
problem, kind of like we are with antibiotics. If we take too many antibiotics, we're kind of lessening their effects.
Correct.
So crop rotation, and was it every 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, if you can get by every year, the better off you'll be. But we've got containers. You know, we've got big pots that we like our tomatoes in, and we can't put anything else in there. So we have to kind of deal with it. So we are looking at, you know, the fungicides a little more. We're looking at the mulch is definitely important. And then if we get issues after that second, third, or fourth year, sometimes we may just not be able to grow tomatoes in there. We may either have to pull that soil out and put new in, or grow something else in there that's not related to a tomato, and that should help you over a few years.
And not to get too technical, but it wouldn't be just tomatoes. It would be plants that are in the tomato family.
Yeah, potatoes are solanaceous. In that family of tomatoes. Right. There's quite a few peppers are another one of those that a lot of our problems that we're going to talk about today are in potatoes and peppers and eggplants and other things, because they are within that family. So, you know, if you can move or rotate out of that particular area into, you know, something, say a corn or, you know, something, you know, a cabbage or something that is different, then that'll help you. Also, things that'll help you is organic matter. Keep that soil fresh. Keep it turned under, and keep disease out of there. And that's obviously going to help you later on.
Well, I think in our last episode we talked about planting your garden. One of the master gardeners, I love their idea. They've got like a fairly large rectangular garden. They've got it split up in quarters, and each year they just
kind of move over,
rotate a quarter, and so they're kind of minimizing, they're manipulating the environment to minimize their disease problem.
And that is really heavy on nematodes, and we'll talk about in a couple later from here.
Right.
But you know, nematodes can build up, and you know, sometimes we get them in there, and it may take 3 or 4 years to get them out, but. Rotation is good. Rotation is a good thing for us. But you know, if we've got a sprinkler system, keep those dry. And if you do have to water above, or you know your sprinkler hits it, water in the morning. We say that all the time. Watering in the morning when there's dew out there already because it's wet, and let it dry out. You know, maybe 10 or 11 in the middle of the day and start drying, and it'll be dry until later on that next night where the dew forms. So that's a longer period where it's dry. Less disease because it's dry, because we're taking that proper environment out of there.
As compared to watering at night, which is tempting because we get home from work or something, we have time to it's easier to stay up later than get up earlier.
That's right.
But you water at night, and so you get them wet, they're going to be damp all night long. And so you've got a warm, moist environment there on your leaves, and they're going to love it. The fungi are going to love it and just kind of explode on you.
Yeah. Another thing we can do, you know, that if that splash from the rain is getting on the leaves, and our plants are pretty tall, we can go ahead and remove some of those bottom leaves.
Right.
Bring it up a little bit where that doesn't have that chance to splash on there.
Right.
A lot of those leaves at that point, you know, we're 50 days, 60 days in after we planted, they may start curling a little, or maybe they start browning or something. We can go ahead and simply remove a few of those. That way that plant's, 18 inches, that first leaf is 18 inches above splash, or 12, then that's going to help us as well. So those are simple things that kind of relate to all of these next 4 diseases that we're going to talk about. But, they all are good things to do. And then we can get into fungicides later, but I think the fungicides may need to be your last resort. There's really no need if we're doing all these proper things. You may get a disease or two, but or we may get an outbreak of Fusarium wilt or southern blight. Then we may go ahead and look at a fungicide. But by that point, if we don't scout, if we don't get them early enough, it may be too late, and we may end up having to pull that plant out anyway, just because we didn't keep up with it and didn't pay attention. Right. So a lot of different things we can do that I think will help you. A lot of them are obvious, but obvious we don't always think of. So that's why we're trying to mention everything.
Well, so we kind of covered general fungal ways to handle it, but let's talk about some individuals that are kind of the top 4 maybe that might see in our garden.
Yeah.
The
Now,
first.
now, before we go, I start squirming when people bring in tomato plants because a lot of these problems look pretty similar, or there may be 2 problems on one plant.
Right.
So with that in mind, yes, it's important to identify which one we have, but it's more important to make sure we're doing the right things to combat these various problems that we have. Now, after talking, if we still are not quite sure of what we have, we do have a disease lab. That's pretty nice. It's pretty good thing. If we're not comfortable saying it is definitely Fusarium, or we kind of are curious and want to know, that way, if we do need to rotate them out, we can. If it's a soil-borne, we have that ability to send that up to campus. Right. And what they'll do, they'll take a cutting or plate it in an auger, put it in a grow chamber, and it'll grow that disease or that virus or that whatever it is. It'll grow into that plate. Then they can tell us for sure that is Fusarium or that is Septoria. Right. At that point. So keep that in mind. Have it in the back of your mind, and I think in the end we're still going to be able to grow tomatoes and still going to be all right.
A lot of tomatoes out there.
Yeah. So it's a fun tomato. It's a fun plant to try, but again it can pull your hair out as well.
Well, the first one we're going to talk about, you mentioned it, the Fusarium wilt.
Yep.
There's a picture of it that's this yellowing. You got a plant that just all of a sudden starts looking bad.
Just doesn't look too good.
Right.
It's kind of early in the spring, so the wilting's not as bad as it would be if we got it in June and July when it's hot. Right. But we're still going to see some yellowing with this, and the yellowing follows the necrosis or the dying of those leaflets. Right. So this is probably one of our more common ones that we get earlier on. Right. Simply go in and prune out the bad. That'll tell you if it's going to be able to survive. You prune it out and you get new green growth that looks pretty good. You may be able to limp it along until June, July, till you can get some fruit. And that's kind of what we're at. That is what we're after. Right. So if it's pretty bad, percentage-wise, half, I think, is the number. If we're having to cut out a lot, then more than likely we just need to remove it and go ahead and plant again. We can still get some new growth. Maybe go away from that variety or go find those plants in the nursery with F, F1, F2, and F3. So
even on seeds, if you buy seeds, you'll see those disease codes, which we talked about a week or 2 ago.
Yeah, a while back.
But they're seeds for plants that have been kind of had a resistance bred into them.
Yeah.
So if you've had a problem with Fusarium, or if you suspect Fusarium, like the next year or whatever, you can get those resistant plants or seeds.
And have less issues.
Can help, which gets back to that disease triangle where we're planting a host.
Trying to get out of that host that's susceptible.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good thing, Fusarium. So if you see something like that, you likely have Fusarium wilt.
Yep.
Another one is southern blight. Southern blight's kind of nasty.
Yeah, southern blight's one that where you'll start seeing it's down at that soil line. You'll start seeing where it's as in the picture where it's just kind of
it's like a lesion.
Got a lesion's a good term.
They call it a water-filled lesion. It's kind of a juicy, squishy kind of part of the plant, and if it gets this far, I don't know if there's a whole heck of a lot.
There's not, and this particular one's kind of mature. It's a mature tomato, so it's probably in January or July, August time frame. And if you're getting something this bad and you're starting to see the lesions, you definitely go ahead and get that out of there. Right. You're not going to get any fruit out of that. There may be some fruit on there, maybe green, that you could go ahead and pull. It's perfectly fine to eat. But for the most part, if you see stems like this, at the base, that more than likely is going to be southern blight and having those issues.
Right. You don't want it to spread. You kind of want to minimize that spread.
So. Yeah, and this not being as much of foliar disease, a fungicide won't do a lot of good at this point because it's soil-borne. It's already attacked that stem. No matter how much fungicide you put on, you're not going to get any control or suppression. It's already done what it's going to do.
Nothing's going to be going up to.
Yeah. So this, and it'll start kind of wilting a little bit. We mentioned wilting prior, but it'll start wilting a little bit. But more than likely, once you see the white lesions, get it out of there and do other things. You can put some
Do other things. Shop for tomatoes at the grocery
Go
store.
to the store and buy them. No, it's not quite that bad, but southern blight is a pretty common one that we have,
Right.
and then we want to rotate that away.
Right.
Yep.
And then early blight, which I think is kind of fascinating because, I mean, this is a pretty obvious
Yeah.
symptom here. These leaves with these dark brown circles. And
Halos.
yeah, and like in the kind of blow up of it, they're kind of concentric
Yeah.
circles.
Yeah. So circular.
that's pretty easy to identify.
And you know, it is pretty common, and this is a good foliar disease, foliar fungus that
Right.
we can get some control a little bit with fungicides. We can help protect those a little bit, like we mentioned earlier,
Right.
bringing those leaves up. But you know, if it gets this bad, what I would do, I'd probably prune it out, prune those limbs out, and if we still have some limbs left, then let it go and see what happens, protect it, and see if we can get there. But you know, early blight's one that it doesn't necessarily occur early on, but it'll occur throughout the season. But the thing is, are those rings that you were talking about, those circles that you see. Sometimes you'll see even more defined dark areas with yellowing around those outside where it's kind of infected. But for the most part, you are going to see those round spots on there. That'll happen. But again, prune them out and get on a pretty good fungicide schedule. Again, whether organic or conventional, should help.
We talked about in the previous episode soil testing, et cetera. This is one where like, a nitrogen deficiency contributes.
Yeah.
to this. If it's not getting all the nitrogen it needs, it's already kind
It's kind of stressed,
of
if
puny
you
or
will,
peaked or
and-
whatever.
yeah.
It makes it more susceptible to
Yeah,
this
so
disease.
so do have our nutrient levels right, which we didn't mention earlier. Which, you know, for most of it, if we've got a good healthy growing plant,
Right.
it's gonna be able to fight off a little more than it
Just
it
like
could
us,
if it was
if we're healthy and in
stressed.
good shape, the cold isn't going to affect us very much. But if we're not,
Correct.
that cold is going to take
Going to
us out.
sniffles and then you're going to go, and if we don't do anything about it, it's going to get worse. So yeah, you'll see this. This is pretty much a guarantee you'll see these problems.
Right.
But do what we were talking about earlier on, and then get it on a fungicide schedule, and that should help you.
This last one I think is Septoria leaf spot. That's pretty common.
Pretty common.
Pretty common.
We see it to varying degrees, whether
Right.
it's one limb or the whole plant.
Right, and it'll start at the bottom
Yeah.
because it's soil borne, and that water splashing on there splashes it up on those leaves.
Yep. So smaller leaves compared. Go back if you can, Tom. Compared to a larger spot
Right.
with our early blight, but now go back the other way. So Septoria's got the little bitty spots on
Right.
it. They can get into a bigger area like we did at the tip here, but for the most part, pretty common. This is a great photo showing these little round specks can coalesce into a bigger spot, but you'll see yellowing. This plant may have not been as healthy. So it was growing slower, therefore the disease got in.
Right.
Or we had a good, wet spring, it's going to have more of these. So again, you can try to prune this out a little bit, but do the cultural practices that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Get it on a fungicide schedule. You should be able to decrease this a little bit.
So that's the big four. So
Yep.
we're back to just review our disease triangle.
Yep.
Being able to manipulate one of those, manipulate the environment, get a disease-resistant version of that plant if you can, and should be good.
Hope for the best. I mean,
for the best.
it is. I mean, once you understand that disease triangle and kind of have your tools around, like keeping them mulched in, and then keeping our fungicide spray on there, that'll help us mostly. We'll be better off for that.
Right.
Yeah.
keep them healthy.
Yep. Keep them healthy.